Okay, so welcome everyone to the 12th Cork .NET Meetup. Today we have André Domingos, and he's going to talk to us about on how to write client web applications with C# using Blazor. If you have a few seconds just before, sorry André, just redeem this QR code or take a snapshot or get the URL. It's really important to us that you access this URL so that our sponsors can track the success and how many people, or get a rough idea of how many people are joining the meetup. So thank you for that. Floor is yours.
All right, welcome everyone. And tonight we're going to talk about writing client web applications in C# using Blazor. A little bit about me. I'm a software architect with Dell Technologies. I've been living here in Ireland for, well, it will be 8 years on the 6th of March this year. I've worked in a few different companies already here. 8 West, previously known as Dcare, great company, and now I just moved to Dell 2 years ago. I've worked in a few different industries already, like banking and insurance, automotive industry, commercial aviation, and others. So I really like C# and the whole Microsoft stack. So when I heard about Blazor, I thought, this looks pretty cool. And some people here can attest that I'm not your best JavaScript developer, so Blazor and C# do come kind of in hand. So what is Blazor, right? Microsoft describes Blazor as a feature of ASP.NET for building interactive web UIs using C# instead of JavaScript. It's real.NET running in the browser on WebAssembly. So it's quite a catchy headline from Microsoft. The sentence doesn't make it full justice. You can also run Blazor apps in server side, which we'll get to the difference between them a little bit further. One thing I was wondering a few months ago was, where did the name come from? And they actually just joined Browser and Razor because Blazor is based on Razor pages, and they came up with the name Blazor. I'm a big fan of Microsoft. Sometimes I think they could do a bit better on their marketing department. I think the name isn't the catchiest. So why would someone use Blazor, right? For me, one of the selling points is no JavaScript. And no JavaScript might seem a bit overreach. There are possibilities of interop. We'll try to get to that later. One great advantage for me is that you can actually leverage in-house C# and .NET knowledge. That whole concept of front-end engineers and back-end engineers, I just think that if you have people writing C# code, very good C# developers, and they want to do some front end, maybe this is a really good way to leverage their skills. Another reason would be similarities with other frameworks such as React. I don't know if you guys have worked with React, but it is component based and seems to be the trend the industry is at right now, and Blazor kind of follows that as well. And one of the other things is WebAssembly is widely adopted. So that's just another point that might help you consider Blazor for your applications. So some of the features of Blazor, right? We have code sharing via Razor component libraries. What that really means is you can write your Blazor component, and I'll explain what a component is and demo component further on the presentation. You can write a component, put it in a library, and maybe have it in a nugget or something like that, and then you can consume it in other applications. So basically, the code can be reusable. That's neat, and there's already a few libraries that are going around from Telerik and DevExpress that you might want to look into. Some of the other cool features of Blazor are stuff that they already gave us out of the box. Virtualize is a very interesting one. And I caught this from the last .NET Conf where they were displaying it. The problem was that they tried to solve it, they solved with Virtualize was if you're rendering a long list of items on the browser, your DOM might become quite expensive. So you're talking about thousands, maybe millions of objects. And what virtualize does, if you have a scrolling, an area with, I don't know, 50,000 lines, like a table with 50,000 rows, virtualize will only render what you have on the screen, so you won't feel that hit. I'll try to demo that later today. There are other out-of-the-box components like edit forms, validation. Microsoft seems to be really betting on it. So support from multiple vendors, that's another one. It's just, like I said before, Telerik, DevExpress, these guys have libraries out there. There's also a free and open source one called Raiden, I believe. I can't recall the name. One of the other features is components. It's just nice to kind of use components in the application for development. I was a bit skeptical at the beginning, but I'm kind of starting to enjoy it. So Blazor can live side by side with ASP.NET MVC applications. That's a really nice feature, especially if you're coming from, you know, corporate software. It's very hard to explain, well, we have this application, can we just rewrite all this in this new technology? Program managers, that just won't sit well with them. We all know that experience. So if Blazor can live side by side with ASP.NET, you can, you know, incrementally try to shift the application if you wanted to give it a try. The other thing is JavaScript interop. If you really are stuck with JavaScript library, you can always use interop to interact with it. So these are some of the features, but where Blazor gets really, really interesting is that you have really two flavors of Blazor. You have Blazor WebAssembly and you have Blazor Server. And even though you can reuse components in both types of applications, the way they're hosted and interact are quite different. So on the left side there, we have we have Blazor WebAssembly, right? So what this means is that your browser has the all applications. So you have your Razor components that sit on top of .NET. That .NET gets then compiled into WebAssembly, and WebAssembly interacts with the browser JavaScript engine to manipulate the DOM. So it's not .NET manipulating the DOM. It's always the browser responsibility to manipulate the DOM via WebAssembly calls to the JavaScript engine. On the right side, on Blazor Server, your application sits on a server, right? Typically, your typical server application, like your MVC application, it's hosted on IIS or Casper or something like that, and the client accesses it. It pulls down the application, loads the HTML, and then a connection, a SignalR connection, is established back to the server, and that's how the DOM gets manipulated. So it's important to understand the differences between both of these hosting models because they are fundamental for you to choose. You know, if you're creating a new application, you really need to know if you're going with a single page application or with the server model. So there really are two different flavors. So moving on. So the difference between these, I kind of summarized it here. On WebAssembly, what happens is your whole .NET framework, well, .NET Core framework is pulled into the browser, right? Not everything, because Microsoft did a very good job of trimming the stuff that your application needs. And but your initial download will always be considerably slow. You are pulling a good couple of DLLs, right? Now the subsequent calls will be very fast because the .NET CLR gets then cached in the browser. WebAssembly also runs offline, so you can also have a progressive applications. There's limited browser compatibility right now. WebAssembly is only supported on Chrome, Edge, Firefox, and even these browsers. It's only some versions, more up-to-date versions. So you really need to take that into consideration if your users are using our favorite browser, Internet Explorer, right? It's very easy to host a WebAssembly application. You just need to serve the content, so it can live on a CDN or in a Azure Static Web App, which is a new offering from Microsoft. I can demo that later as well. It's really, really straightforward. The problem with WebAssembly is because it runs on the browser and this single page application, any API that you have needs to be hosted externally, right? So you will need to have a server hosting an API, and your WebAssembly Blazor application is then calling that API. But you cannot have the API code running in the browser, right? APIs are usually protected, so you really need to be careful that everything that you have running in the browser can be tampered and people can look into. There is limited authentication support. This is a kind of an interesting topic as well. While preparing this presentation, I was reading a lot into the authentication, trying to figure out if it was good to them or not. The conclusion is it merits its own meetup exclusive to authentication. With WebAssembly, Microsoft's recommendation is just use OpenID Connect that sits on OAuth 2 and stay away from stuff like Windows authentication. So their recommendation is to use OIDC. And another interesting feature of WebAssembly is the synchronization context, right? Similar to what a JavaScript application does, there's only one thread running. So WebAssembly mimics that. So you will never run into synchronization issues in the true sense of synchronization, as in multiple threads fighting for the same resource. And that kind of sums up WebAssembly, the hosting model, really. So if you compare that to server, you can see there that, for example, server just has server-side rendering. So you make the request and you're served the HTML. So your initial request when there is no cache will definitely be much faster than WebAssembly. Well, at least we hope, unless you have a really, really slow server, but it should be much faster for the first time. So there's way more browser compatibility with Blazor server. One of the way it works, according to MSDN, is when they so SignalR has support for, I'm not exactly sure, but I know it doesn't support IE8 and IE9, not about 10. So what happens is when they detect these lower version browsers, they fall back to a different mechanism. So Microsoft did extensive work there to support everybody's favorite browser. And you know, starting IE8, it's pretty old. I'm surprised that they actually went through the effort. So another thing here is Blazor server requires server hosting. So you're dependent on hosting it on Kestrel or IIS. There's no way around it. It is a typical server application. It has the advantage of being easy to host any APIs, because if you already have the infrastructure, so you just can have it sitting next to the application. And state management is easier with Blazor server, right? Because you can store state in a database. And if you're looking at WebAssembly, if you want to store any kind of state locally, you're looking at local storage or session storage, and any of that state can always be modified by the user. So that's something that you need to be aware of. And Blazor server supports multiple authentication mechanisms, unlike WebAssembly. So just be mindful of these. There might be more. The documentation for Blazor is extensive. Microsoft really seems very keen on putting it out there. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask here, or if you want to check the documentation, I'll try to answer to the best of my abilities. So moving on from this, I'm going to focus this presentation more on the WebAssembly side of things, just because of time constraints. So this page, this slide here is the anatomy of the template for a Blazor WebAssembly application, right? You can see quite easily that it has your program.cs there at the bottom. And that's really your entry point for the application. So it sets up the WebAssembly host, you set up your dependency injection there, and that's how the application gets initialized. Then you have your static assets under the www root folder. And that has stuff like your index HTML, which is really the HTTP entry point. It defines the app element. So that's so if you've worked in React or Angular, you know that the application gets bound to an HTML element, typically a div, and Blazor follows the same approach. That index HTML also has a very interesting JavaScript reference to the WebAssembly engine. You also have the CSS folder, any images folder, you can host it there, and the app settings as well. The app.razor, so that would be your root component for a Blazor application. And the app.razor, what it does, it sets up the client-side routing using the router component. And what happens is the router component intercepts browser navigation requests and renders the page that matches the requested address. For those of you who've worked on ASP.NET MVC, you know, basically set up the root using the root attribute, and your application will kind of your action method in the controller get hit when you navigate to that root. Then you have your imports.razor. So those are common Razor directives that are included in the apps that you can use in the applications component, basically under Razor files. It's just namespaces that allow us to do the using directives. And then we get to the fun part, right? Most of this stuff from the components up is a bit boilerplate code, right? You create a new project and the template just gives you all this. But then you look at components, and that things where it start to get interesting. The template application just has two folders, one for pages and one for shared components. Shared components just reminds me of partial views, right? And it is kind of the same concept. You can reuse these components all over the application. While in the pages folder, what Microsoft is putting there in the template, it's your actual full component that can be navigated to. And you know, there's a lot of conversation about components, but what really is a component? So, as it says there, components are basically blocks of a user interface. They are a Razor page, or they are a component that can be reused across, and they're comprised of HTML, which is your markup, CSS to make your HTML pretty, and C# code. So you don't need to have the C# code, the HTML, and the CSS all in the same file. So if you create a component in Visual Studio, you'll see that you can actually add, imagine I had a, let me see, navigation.razor. I could have the code for it in the navigation.razor.cs file. So it's not like your file won't get too verbose. And if your file does get too verbose, maybe you can refactor logic into another component. So then in the components, you can do the event handling. So you can define events on the HTML. You can set up you can rewrite your data binding, which can be, you know, something as simple as just showing a value from a field, or you can actually do two-way data binding, where you can input something in a form and it just gets bound to a parameter or to a field in the C# code. You also set up your routing, and you have parameters that can be fed from top-level components, right? So I think this will be easier to see during the demo. So another interesting thing in components, in which is one of the pillars of Blazor, is dependency injection. So we all do dependency injection nowadays. There is no way around it. And the way that this typically works in a Blazor application, WebAssembly, is you have your typical dependencies, which are an HTTP client to make HTTP requests, a JavaScript runtime, which is used for JavaScript interop, and a navigation manager that it's used by Blazor to manage URIs and navigation between the pages. And if you have your own dependencies, you can inject them as well, which I think it's really great because it allows you to just, if you want to call an API, you just inject the interface. You set up the dependency injection in your program.cs. You can unit test that separately. And then in Blazor, you can just make those calls in the component. So the way dependency injection happens in a component is it happens during the component's first render. So what this means is when your component is created, it goes through a lifecycle. So the first step, the CLR creates the instance of the component, and immediately it injects the properties injects the dependencies via property injection. So you can set up your dependencies on the program.cs using the service collection. You can see there from the image that I'm registering the HTTP client here, and I'm also registering an API which implements iNews API. So this is, you would inject your iNews API in your component if you wanted to render articles that are coming from this API. This is something I'll try to demo later. One thing that's important to be aware of, that WebAssembly applications don't really have the concept of scopes. And I found this interesting that they just work as singletons. And I got this from MSDN a couple of days ago. And I'll be honest, when I was preparing the demos, I struggled a bit with registering the scopes because I was getting some errors when this was being registered, but the error wasn't very obvious. So just be careful if you want to play around with this, that just be mindful of these gotchas here with registering the scopes. Yeah, so that's kind of it for dependency injection. I'm assuming most people here know what dependency injection is, and you probably use it anyway. So let's see something about the component, how a component actually is generated and what happens in its life cycle. So the first time a component is called is it's by its parent, right? So when the parent renders, this component first render happens. And that's the part here in purple. So it creates the instance of the component, which the garbage collector stores. And then it starts to call methods that you can override. So one of them is the set parameters async. So what happens is on your first render, your component is created, and then all the parameters, and then after that, sorry, you create the instance, then the dependency injection happens. I didn't put it here in this flowchart just because I was a bit low on space. And then it starts calling lifecycle methods. So you can override the set parameters async as well. So when that method is called, it takes in the parameters from the parent component and it populates them. Then you have the uninitialized async, which is a really important method from the life cycle. you'll see from the examples that this method is where you kind of actually go and grab data from your API and do something to update the markup. So the way it works is on the initialize the thing, if it returns a task, then it awaits for the task to execute and then calls the render for the component. If nothing is returned, then it moves on to the on parameter set, I think, which has the same behavior. If a task is returned, it awaits the task and renders it. If not, it renders it. So the component can be rendered a couple of times on this life cycle. And when I say render, there's also a life cycle for the render that I think it's kind of interesting to go through. So you have your first render. If it's your first render, then the render tree is built. And by render tree, for those of you who've worked with React, for example, there's this concept of, you'll be familiar with this. There's this concept of a virtual DOM. So the way Blazor works is it will see what DOM needs to be updated, and it will only send the delta. So we're not updating the whole DOM. So back to the life cycle, builds the render tree, sends the batch that needs to be updated, then it awaits for the DOM to be updated, and then there's another method on the after render, I think. If you want to force a render, you can call a method called sStateChanged, and that will trigger a render as well. So the component lifecycle is kind of it's complex, but I believe if you want to do more advanced things with Blazor, it kind of is important to know, right? And moving on from the components, which we'll do a demo as well. Another important feature for me of Blazor is testing. And I was a bit surprised that there's currently no official support from Microsoft, right? So if you want to do component testing, which is kind of the whole thing around it, right? You need to use third party. And the only one I found apparently is BUnit. So let's see how Microsoft takes this forward. I'm assuming they'll probably have some sort of official support for either BUnit, or they'll come up with their own platform. Now, BUnit just works pretty well with other test frameworks. I tried this yesterday with NUnit, and I found that it's just very straightforward to use. Basically, what you do is you create a test context and render your component, feeding the parameters that it needs, and then you can interact with it quite easily. And this is something I caught from their documentation. Is I was writing the unit tests in plain C# code, and they actually support writing tests in Razor syntax, but that only is supported using XUnit, which I've never used before. So looks something interesting. Definitely have to take a look there. And it's kind of how you do your component testing, right? If you're testing a Blazor application, you can unit test all your business logic code that sits in libraries and all that. But when it comes to the actual markup and presentation, it has to be done like this. The other option is end-to-end testing, where you do your full application testing, right? You can automate it via frameworks such as Selenium or Ranorex Studio or something like that, but has its pitfalls, right? You have no access to component instances, so you really have no easy way to see if your component is rendering or hiding or displaying or whatever your testing is doing, or wherever your component is doing. And it is slower to test. But I think that these kind of they complement each other pretty well. Not much more about testing. I think we can, if we have time, I'll show you guys the unit test that I wrote. Maybe it's just 2 unit tests, and maybe that sheds some light on how it fits in. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about, but I really think it's worth to bring it up to another session, is authentication and authorization in Blazor. So from one perspective, I easily got authentication and authorization working with Google Authentication API. But I think it would be nice to actually have a session fully dedicated to it, where we can go through the two flavors of Blazor and see how it fits on WebAssembly and how it fits in with Blazor server. So I won't dig in too much into this, but again, it's to those of you who work with MVC, it's the routing is the authorization is kind of the same approach. You just decorate with the authorized attribute or the authenticate attribute. So that's kind of what I have from a slides perspective. It's maybe demo time, and I know that the topic is quite big, so I don't know if anyone has any questions. So does anyone have any questions that you want to put there in the chat or something? So someone asked about Blazor for mobile applications. I know that Microsoft is launching support for Blazor Desktop starting .NET 6. But when it comes to mobile applications, so maybe you're just better off just writing an application for the browser that sits well in a mobile application. I really don't know what support they have. Like, if you're talking about something like Xamarin, or I'm really not sure. So let me stop the slide deck.
Darren has a question here. Is anyone using Blazor in production that you know about?
Well, I'm not. And I think there's a lot of companies are starting to use it, right? I'll be honest, it's one of those things that I think the tooling isn't perfect yet. For those of you who use Visual Studio Code, I think it might be working a bit better than actual Visual Studio.
That's another perk of being a developer that uses VS Code.
Yeah.
Not only an awesome code editor, but you get these benefits.
I would say Blazor server is more mature. Okay, so Kieran actually typed there that yeah, Maui. I remember about that now. It's that's replacing Xamarin. So let's see what comes in .NET 6 really. I find that the support for desktop applications it sounds very promising. So for the demo, it's kind of tricky because it's hard to find a good balance between doing something too simple or kind of doing something too complex. So Jonathan, how does WebAssembly run on the browser? Is it translated into JavaScript? No, it's actually built-in browser support. So the way it works is your .NET code gets compiled to WebAssembly, and WebAssembly actually has the responsibility of interacting with the browser JavaScript engine. So that's how the DOM gets updated. It's a cool read. If you go to the WebAssembly web page, there's a ton of information there. I think you can actually write it in C++ as well now. So if you want to write a web application in C++ using WebAssembly, that would make for a nice meetup. So for the demo, let's kick off with creating a new Blazor application using Microsoft's template, right? Which is the starting point for all these demos. Let me share my screen. Sean, Blazor is .NET standard, so it's kind of the support is limited, but I would say that you don't need full support if you're doing web applications, especially on the client side. But yeah, that's a very interesting question. Okay, so I thought I was sharing my screen. I apologize. Okay, so I'm just gonna do a bit of cheating here. I already have the application open on Visual Studio, so if you want to create a new template, you go .NET new wasm. It's this will create a WebAssembly application, and I'm not even gonna bother to open this one here because I have same thing open already in Visual Studio here, just with another name.
You have a question there, André, from Joe Gill. Will you be covering how a web API call from wasm is secured?
Not on this meetup, unfortunately.
That would be for the next one about
I
authentication and
wanted it
authorization.
to, just so everyone is aware. I find that there's so many things to demo, and because these meetups are around 45 minutes to 1 hour, that I don't really think we can demo everything. Joe, I would love to demo that. And definitely, if there's interest, we can schedule something for a future meetup. So this is your simple template from Microsoft. You can see here, you have your www root folder, the CSS, the index. We can go through the index, and you can see here that it's actually loading the blazor.webassembly. You have your components, which are Razor files. It's very, very simple, and your program. So if I kick this off, I'll just run it. So I will do something different. I'm going to show you guys what happens when you load the WebAssembly application. And it's kind of a cool because, oh, I should have, nope. Let me run it again, because that should have loaded all the .NET stuff. It's the demo gods are never aligned for the meetups. Damn, no, I don't know. I'll do it on Chrome. No hassle. So I've actually started using Edge instead of Chrome. Good job that Microsoft did here. I guess they're trying to make up for their sins of the past. So if I load this, yeah. So you can see all these sweet libraries coming down, right? And your first load is quite gigantic, right? We're talking about 9 megabytes. But this happens once, you know, as long as cache is not cleared, and it is stored in the browser. So if I clear this and if I reload the application, let me know if the windows are too small or something, or it will just load a couple of files now, right? Nothing out of the ordinary. And this is kind of your simple page from Microsoft. They have a few good examples here that we can go through. It loaded once per each Blazor app. No, not really. What it does, well, actually, I'm not sure. If I have another application that might have different dependencies, I don't know what's going to happen. If it's going to load just the stuff that's missing, or if it's going to download everything else again. I would say it will just download the libraries that it depends on. But I would have to check and come back to you, Sean. That's a pretty interesting question there. And okay, so let's go through the anatomy of a component here. If I open this application now, I think we can start with the counter one. So this is a very, very simple component that the template has, right? So you can see that they're setting up the routing here. On page, they're using the page directive to set up the routing. And you can see here that if I go to counter, that's exactly what it matches, right? And when I click here, there's actually two-way data binding here. One is when I click the button, the way this is handled is, let me just, I'm going to zoom this a bit. Not great. Let me see. So when I click this button, what's happening from the component perspective is you have your markup here, your standard HTML. You're doing one-way binding here. So you're saying here on the current count that you want to read the value, this value here, which is already part of your code block. So this is just a private field. And when you click here, you're just basically calling this increment count method. And as you can see, whenever this gets updated, the count gets updated as well. So it's, and the cool thing about this is just sending the small delta of the DOM that needs to be updated. It doesn't reload the whole page. This is a very simple example that Microsoft has here on the template, but I think it's nice to kind of get you on the flow of things looking at Blazor. So we can then navigate to the fetch data component that they have here, which goes and gets data from via the HTTP client in their scenario. And if we look at the code for that, and earlier when I was presenting the lifecycle, I mentioned the uninitialize. I think they have an example here of that. So you inject the HTTP client here. Again, you can see that this is just bound to fetch data. It's rooted to, sorry, the root is fetch data. You inject the HTTP client. This is just standard markup. So one cool thing is that they do here is this forecasts is really an array of weather forecasts, which you just use to populate this table. But initially it takes, so the field is null, right? So if I refresh this, you'll see that it says, damn, it's hard. It is quick enough. It says loading. And what happens is, I don't know if you could see the loading showing up there. Hard to get it showing really. So yeah, what happens is when the data is loading, and that's done on the initialized, I think, right? So it starts by saying this because your field is null. And then on what they did was they created an override on the uninitialized, I think. And that's where they're actually using the HTTP client that they injected here to get the data. So this sample data, this lives on the static files. And what happens is the page is rendered. This is the initial render where it just says loading. But because there is an actual task on the initialized, I think the task is awaited, the forecasts get populated, and then another render happens, and that's how we end up with this cool view here. So this is a very, very simple example. Any questions about this so far? Thanks for joining, Michael. I'll catch you soon. Okay, so if there's no questions, this is a very simple example, right? I'm just going to do something using Azure Static Web Apps, which is a new offering from Microsoft, to show how you guys can very quickly deploy a Blazor WebAssembly application without needing any serving or something like that. So I'm gonna, my browser here already had some stuff open. I already created that I already created the repo with this simple demo here, right? So it's even though the name is different, it's just same code. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to Azure, and I'm on my Azure account. I'm just going to close this, and I'm going to create a new static web app. So if I pick here, static web app. So I'm going to point it to my GitHub repo, and so I don't know if you guys have used Azure, but they just kind of pick your subscription. Oh, I pick the resource group. The name can be Blazor wasm demo, and the region where you want to host your static web application. I'll just go with West Europe. And then this is surprising. It has integration with GitHub, but not with Azure DevOps, which is a real shame. I would assume Microsoft would have support for their own offering. So I'm going to pick up my organization. I'm going to pick up my simple demo repository, and I'm going to go with the main branch. So GitHub recently renamed the master branch the main branch. So I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that. When you now create a new repo, it defaults the branch name to main. And here I'm going to just pick up Blazor. So you have a few more here: Angular, React, Vue, Svelte. Never heard of this. So I'm just going to go Blazor, and then just populate the application. So this needs to be the root folder because that really maps with the repo. So if my application code was in I don't know, some other folder, you would just point to that folder, but here it's actually the root folder. There is no API. They actually offer support for APIs. I haven't played around with it. It seemed like something cool. So I'm going to review and create. And what this does, this is going to create a few actions on my GitHub repository. And let's hope it all goes well. The deployment is quite quick, right? And I can go to the resource here. And if we look here now, we can see that Microsoft added the workflows. And if I navigate to my actions here, so I don't know if you guys ever used GitHub Actions. It's their CI/CD offering. So out of the box, I just have the application being run and deployed to Azure Static Web Apps. Which I have to say, it's pretty cool, except even if you go here, when this gets, when this gets deployed, it will take a, let me open this here. If I navigate to this website, it's still deploying. But you can make some changes here, so you can set up environments, and you know, you can. It also deploys when you create PRs, and it just seems like something cool. Now, when I tried authentication with it, it didn't work well. So just be aware if you're going to play around with this, there are a few gotchas. And I was playing around with multiple routes for the same component as well, and that kind of fell through as well. So I have to do a bit more digging there. So while we wait for this to build and deploy, we can refresh it later. Let's see if we can do a more advanced example here. So they have this real simple demo, right? I am going to augment a bit this survey prompt that they have here. And I'll explain how parameters are used as well. So their demo has this very basic survey prompt, which just doesn't have any interactions there. So what I can do here is I can actually create a button to dismiss this. And, you know, if this was one of those prompts that your user typically wants to get rid of and never see again, in a WebAssembly application where we can store this, it would be on the local storage or on the session storage. But to access that, you actually have to use JavaScript interop. So Blazor WebAssembly, so your Blazor WebAssembly application will use the interop given by the Blazor runtime to kind of say, hey, store this on Java on the storage. And the way to do that, I have a component that I created for another solution that I was going to demo here. So if you guys have any questions in the meanwhile, feel free to ask. It's, you know, this is all a bit going quick, but there's just so much stuff about Blazor that it's hard to demo it all in one go. So I have here my shared survey prompt. So I'm going to open this one here. And I'm going to replace it with something way more complex. And
there's a question there, André.
Yeah.
Can we debug into C# code in the browser?
Yeah, you can. It works better with Visual Studio Code than with Visual Studio. Again, surprised. One gotcha here is hot reload. So one of the problems that I found using Visual Studio, and you don't have that, Visual Studio Code does seem to have a better experience. It's just that I'm old school and I prefer Visual Studio. The page contents has to be refreshed in the browser and you have to build and run it. And you can use .NET Watch using Visual Studio Code, and that kind of triggers your hot reload. But Microsoft is working on it, so I'm sure they'll have more support for Visual Studio in the coming times. So this, what we're doing here, if I run this again, is the pop-up is kind of different now. And so this is what I was saying. I kind of need to run it and open it in the browser, and just not the greatest developer experience using Visual Studio. Now, there might be ways around it. It's just that I'm not aware of. Now, that's not showing here because I think I was testing this survey and I actually dismissed it and wrote it to local storage. Okay, so here we go. So now I can actually dismiss this, and someone actually, I might as well just debug the code and step through. So what this is doing is when I click this dismiss button, I am going to trigger this dismiss call, which does something relatively simple, right? Now, disclaimer, I had some issues getting the debugger running. I noticed that I had to restart Visual Studio 1 or 2 times. And let's hope this is not one of those times. Oh, I actually need to do this on this page. Let's see if this triggers the breakpoint. It didn't. So maybe it's bound to the browser. Probably is. So this didn't work out nicely. Oh, actually, it did. Okay. So if I go here, now the survey dismissed is set to true. So that will make this small HTML content disappear. And what I do is I call this method set status dismissed in local storage. And I'm just using the JavaScript runtime that I injected earlier. So if you look at the code here, I'm injecting this interface, and this is given by Blazor. I didn't need to register this on the program.cs. This is one of those that it's just given to you out of the box. And I just store something simple. I just store that the user dismissed on the local storage. And we can take a look at the local storage here. And here, survey dismissed true. And what this component also does is I overrode the uninitialized async, and what I can do here, oh, not this one, maybe this one. Now I have too many browsers open. If I refresh this, it didn't. I don't know what window it was. Well, no problem. What I do is I just set the survey dismissed here by reading the setting from the local storage. So what I'm checking is I'm checking if it exists, I'll return the value. And this is a very simple example, but it kind of shows you how you can use the JavaScript runtime, JavaScript interop. And there are a few other things here, like, for example, this parameter here, title, this gets set by the parent component. And if we look at the parent component, which sits in the, I don't even know where it is, index, you can see that this is actually another component, and it's just using another shared component here by survey prompt, which is the name of that shared component, and then just specifying the data for that parameter here. Now, these are very, very simple examples, right? I wanted to demo you guys something a bit more juicy. So I actually created an application called Dodgy Mail, which is loosely based on some tabloids. And the Dodgy Mail has all that stuff that people like to see, like you know, a lot of clickbait articles and stuff like that. And typical newspaper, you kind of have your, well, clickbait newspaper, I would say. You kind of have your clickbait news here, and you also have the weather. I was just lazy and didn't bother replacing this. And earlier during my presentation, I mentioned something about the virtualize, which is a component that Microsoft has in Blazor that renders only what's visible on the page. And that's a really, really good example.
Sorry, André. Can you zoom a bit the browser?
I can't, sorry. Yeah. Is it better now?
I suppose. Vinod?
Okay. So I'm rendering, so Sean asked something about the debugging into C# code in the browser. Oh no, Sean, not that I know of. Yeah, not that I know of. I think you're stuck with Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio to debug. So I kind of cheated a bit here, and I'm just rendering, I think it's 10 articles here. But I changed this to add more articles. So if I load this with 1,000 articles, you kind of see, you know, it's still rendering okay. It's not too bad. So for 4,000 articles, it's not too bad. So the browser can still cope with it. But if I try to render 10,000, and let me just check that what I'm showing here has the correct component. Yeah, it's what I'm doing. And okay, I should have explained this first. So the articles page, what really is doing is just a for each in articles, and articles are just being fetched from a news API that I injected here. This is something really simple, guys. I'm not calling anything. It's just everything. It's kind of you know, hard coded and stuff like that. So I'm rendering an article display where I'm passing the article as a parameter, and then a photo URL. Just I got those clickbait thumbnails. Kind of had a blast doing this, to be honest. And this is kind of what we're rendering. And here I'm saying the article count, I'm just specifying it as a optional parameter, just to say that the default is 10. So I have that somewhere, yeah, here. So if it's set to 0, I default it to 10. Otherwise, I just go with a really high article count. Again, the code to fetch the data is in the uninitialized, I think. And if I try to reload this now with 10,000 rows, it will kind of get messy, right? It's you can see it's getting sluggish. It's taking a long time to render the component. That authorizing it's just because it's behind a login. And you could see it was very, very sluggish, right? So I'm not even going to try with 100,000. I tried it earlier and it's not a great experience. But if you go here and change this, instead of using a for each, I'm going to comment this out. You use the virtualized component, and the virtualized basically, this is the component signature. You just tell it, look, the items are my articles, the context is an article, and then it uses this context to pass down to this shared component here. So in case you're wondering, the article display is very, very simple. It just has some HTML where I just render the photo URL, the article. The go-to article doesn't even do anything, and just 2 parameters. It's really straightforward. Now, if I run this again, you'll see that the rendering is much faster. You see, this was, oh, sorry, let me put the crazy number here. So 1,000 should be okay. 10,000 should be okay either, and 100,000 should be okay either. I have a feeling this is still using the old version of the application. So let me refresh, force a refresh here, or actually use an incognito window. Did I build the application? I'm not sure I did. So maybe there's that. I'll try to zoom in a bit here. And if I go here again, let's see. Okay, so for 100,000, it was much quicker than if I don't use the virtualized component. Now, these are things that Microsoft are actually working on. And I think I tried with 1,000,000. It might, I think I might be pushing it here. I tried this earlier with a really long number and the browser just became unresponsive. So, and seems like that just happened. So,
Oops, you did it again.
yeah. Vnode, no, they're not. I don't think they are. I tried that, but yeah, this just kind of bombed. As far as I could tell, they were not Vnode. So that's a very good question because it really might help with some development. No, because Blazor is Razor, right? So the syntax is Razor. Yes, André, I can check the right now, or do you want me to run it again? So Task Manager is kind of slow on this laptop. There's a bit going on. So Andrea, I'll let you know if, oh my God, now my machine is completely crawling.
You killed it.
No, I think I've noticed this before. When I'm screen sharing, you see, I'm not even moving my mouse, but it had that nice, yeah, I need to stop sharing and I'll share again in a second. It's not my machine, it's Zoom. And I can't even hit the screen share button, the stop share button. So let's give it a second for it to recover if it does. Yeah, so I'm completely out of no control of my machine whatsoever, which is something always cool to happen during a demo, I guess. So Andre, you can see there 2 gigabytes in Edge, but I have plenty of tabs open as well. Oh my God, I really can't do anything with this. Okay, I think it kind of stabilized. Ooh. But yeah, look, it has limitations, right? So what else? I think we're running out of time, so I don't want to keep people over the time limit. There's really is a ton of stuff that we can demo here. You can see that you know it works okay. It's a nice technology. It's not perfect yet. I think, but I think it's really going on the right direction. Now, Andre, to your point about the memory in Edge, you know, I have a lot of browsers open, but yeah, there was a good chunk of memory going on there. Now, this dodgy mail, I don't know what else I have here. I think I also had authentication and the contact us form that's behind an authentication. So we can take this further into another meetup or something like that. It's just so I can always log in and just show you guys hello, yada yada yada, and on the contact us. Again, this is kind of given this is an edit form control, which is also a Blazor component. So I can just go here, Andre email, I won't put anything here. If I try to submit, validation is given out of the box. Not the fanciest validation, but it's just a matter of styling it. And if you put these things, it supports, I didn't go crazy on the validation, but you can add like ranges and stuff like that. And just some message here. And if you want to look at this, it's very, very straightforward. You have your, so this is how you kind of put something behind the authorization and authentication. So I'm using the edit form here. I just say what my model is for the edit form. You just put your data annotations validator here, and the model is as simple as just, I'm not doing anything with it. I'm just kind of outputting it to the browser console. And the model is as simple as this. So you can use data annotations for similar to MVC, where you can decorate your attributes for the validation, which makes life easier, really. And this is an inclusive thing. Just typically we go with 99, but some people go past the age of 99. So I don't know what the threshold is there, so I just went with maximum value. Yeah, this is kind of what I have to demo. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming. I know it's a lot to take in, and there's a lot of content in Blazor. It is a fully blown framework, and it's very hard to fit all of it in 1 hour. So if anybody has any suggestions or questions, just please feel free to reach out. And I'll let Ricardo take it on from now.
Yeah, thanks for the content, Andre. And I think you have some requests to get the session on authentication and authorization, security, etc. So maybe content for the next meetup. So let's see. There were a lot of joining and leaving, and I did my best to get all names. available here. So I'm just going to leave this for a second. And if you don't see your name there, blame André. And while you check the names, I'd just like to take the chance to thank you all for joining us today. We are always getting contacts from people looking for talent, and because the meetup is about .NET and Azure, we usually get like a lot of texts asking if we know about anyone that work in that stack and is available. So if you are looking for something, or you know someone that is looking for something, feel free to reach out anytime. There's always loads of contacts that we can share, especially during these challenging times. So feel free to reach out. There's a LinkedIn group. The link is on the meetup page, and I think it's also on Twitter. We are available to contact on the meetup page, on YouTube, on Twitter, on, I don't know, just reach out if you need anything, or if we can help with something. So as you might know, we are sponsored by Dell Technologies, JetBrains, and Pact Publishing. So we have license 100% free any product raffle. And what we do is we get the names of everyone that is still with us, and we raffle the license. So without further ado, let's get the party started.
This really has a feeling of those really, trashy 90s shows like The Wheel of Fortune and stuff like that.
Yeah, Wheel of Fortune.
And they need a music, a little song.
And Niall is the winner. Is Niall still online? Can you check, Andre? Because I don't have the chat.
Yeah. He is, yeah.
Yeah. So Niall, reach out so we can send you the coupon. And I'm going to leave Niall again because we have 3 books to raffle from Pact.
So
and
Niall,
the books are...
I think we work together. Well, not together, but in the same company. Wasn't that so?
I don't know if you want to enable chat for everyone or not. But
so
the books are Software Architecture with C# 9 and .NET 5, C# 9 and .NET 5, and ASP.NET Core 5 and Angular. We have the links on the meetup page of the event. So I'm going to spin the wheel 3 times, and the winner or the winners, just let me know, reach out, or just type which I don't know what happened here. I was taking some notes and everything disappeared. So let's do a strategic swap. Customize. Yes. And we even change the colors. So Andy. So yeah, you know the drill. You won something on the previous meeting, so just send me a message to make sure that we get the book sent to you. Which book do you want? Where's my...
So what books do we have to give?
So we have Software Architecture with C# 9 and .NET 5, C# 9 and .NET 5, and ASP.NET Core 5 and Angular. So Andy said C# 9 and .NET 5. Sharp 9 and... I'm old, I need to take notes. So congratulations, Andy, once again. Kevin O'Callaghan. And which book do you want, Kevin?
I think it dropped.
You left?
Yeah.
Oh, if you left, someone else will get the prize. Congratulations, Danielle.
Oh.
What book do you want? You can speak if Andrea gives you the...
Can I? Suffering from Zoom fatigue. I forget what I can and can't do with Zoom. Let's see, Daniel Silva. Here you go. You can talk now.
Hey, thank you. So,
Thank you.
which books are remaining? Sorry, I didn't memorize.
Software architecture with C# 9 and .NET 5, and ASP.NET Core 5 and Angular.
Okay, it can be the software architecture.
Okay.
Are you the Daniel Silva I work with?
Yes, yes, I am.
How are you?
I'm fine. I see a lot of.
Yeah, I see a lot of familiar names here today.
Yeah. But I just noticed in the list of the wheel of names. I was not aware that it was too many former colleagues in the meeting.
Yeah. Let's give it one last spin.
The Cork and Lisbon.NET and Azure Meetup. We need to expand our advantage of the remote thing.
So, Mehdi, congratulations, and you'll take the ASP.Core 5 and Angular because it's the only one that we have left today. But if you join the next time, you might win one of the others or some other titles. So everyone that won something, just reach out on any of the social networks that we are on, and Meetup or Twitter, and we'll send you the book. So the next meeting will be on the last Tuesday of the next month, so March. It will be March the 30th, and it will be the title will be Enabling Continuous Monitoring with Azure Monitor, and this talk will be by the one of the authors of the book Software Architecture with C# 9 and .NET 5. So looking forward to this one. So I'd like to thank you all again. Yeah.
Was there something about the recruitment opportunities that we were used to talk about?
I already mentioned before, spinning the wheel, but
I
can
did.
say
Sorry.
again. So people often reach out asking if we know about anyone looking for opportunities, and if you are looking for something or you know about anyone looking, just reach out. We have a couple of them at the moment, and we'll just make sure that people get in touch with you.
I know of a couple of positions in Cork, .NET positions in Cork, and at least one in Limerick. So just reach out if you're interested.
Yeah, the best way to do it is just join the LinkedIn group. It should be on the Meetup page. If not, just reach out and I'll send you the link, or search for Cork.NET and Azure on LinkedIn. And yeah, it's easier to share the positions because there's that's where usually they share them. So yeah, thank you everyone again. And I don't know if you want to say anything else, André.
No, I'm good. It's dinner time.
Okay,
thanks everyone.
that's it. Thanks everyone, and see you soon. The video, as always, will be published as soon as possible in our YouTube channel. Take care.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.